Hey, let's do it for the content. Mega Ran. Let's go. Let's get it. Dick Kick City. It gets gritty when Mega Ran come through. The kid gets busy. Work yourself into a shoot, but you know it's legit. Like what you like, just don't be a dick. Hey, wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah. What's that set? Maybe you should bottle it. Drink it and spray it on. Get Claude to model it. 8 years in, can't look back. Who else can make the Lord sweatsuits look whack? Wrestling with regret. Let's get it. Yeah.
Sometimes professional wrestling can be a great reflection of the best and the worst of our culture and society. Other times it can be cravenly desperate for any mainstream credibility it can find. Wrestling is a lot of things, but one thing it definitely is not is subtle. Wrestling and pop culture have hooked up incessantly over the decades, with some meetups being a lot more fun than others. But it's time to look back at some of the metaphorical one-night stands we'd all like to forget. And this week, I'm gonna rank them the top 8 worst pop culture tie-ins in wrestling history. Number 8, Mickey Rourke at WrestleMania 25. When you talk about great films in the wrestling category, you can't go wrong with 2008's The Wrestler. Directed by Darren Aronofsky, the movie changed the opinions of some who looked down the business and single-handedly pulled Mickey Rourke's acting career from out of the mothballs. One person who liked the movie, somewhat surprisingly, was Vince McMahon, who even went so far as to contact Aronofsky himself to tell him how he was touched by the film. It probably didn't hurt that Rourke was getting all sorts of attention and accolades for his role, including a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination. Given the timing of the film's award season buzz, some sort of crossover event at WrestleMania 25 seemed like a no-brainer. And in fact, plans were underway for just that, but then Rourke committed the ultimate sin. He broke kayfabe. While on the red carpet for the SAG Awards, Rourke basically gave away that he was set to have a match at WrestleMania against Chris Jericho. Gosh, I guess Offa never taught him in training how to protect the business. Almost immediately, Rourke's handlers warned Mickey that his involvement with WWE threatened to discourage Academy voters from picking him as that year's Best Actor. Apparently, Vince McMahon wasn't going to start promoting the match until February, well after the awards show season was done with, so the Micker going into business for himself blew the whole deal. That match was scrapped, then Jericho pivoted to Ric Flair, who he saw as a representative of the movie, I guess. But since Flair had retired the year before, this Randy the Ram proxy needed another proxy of his own in the form of Roddy Piper, Jimmy Snuka, and Ricky Steamboat. Rourke was present for the match while sitting at ringside, but looked very bored as Jericho took out all 3 legends by himself in an elimination match. Jericho called Rourke into the ring after the bell, but instead of pulling off some cool wrestling move, maybe even a ram jam, Rourke just KO'd Jericho and celebrated with the other wrestlers. You could argue that we still got our Rourke-Jericho Mania moment, but only a disappointing and half-hearted shell of what it could have been. Number 7. Chucky cuts a promo on Rick Steiner. In October of 1998, Rick Steiner and Chucky, the killer doll from the Child's Play film series, were both at a crossroads. Rick was at odds with his brother Scott, who had recently joined the NWO, and Chucky was at odds with his bride, Tiffany, a conundrum he had planned to remedy in his comeback film, Bride of Chucky. And what better way to ensure the movie's success than by harassing a completely random pro wrestler, which he did on the October 12th edition of Monday Nitro.
We get the fall.
What the devil? Get that dummy out of here! We're trying to conduct an interview.
This might have worked a few years earlier at the beginning of his singles run when Rick Steiner was portrayed as somewhat of a simpleton. But the Rick Steiner fans had seen since he and Scott dominated the tag scene for nearly a decade seemed somewhat above this. Man, where were the LOD and Rocco when we needed them? This segment stood out as being incredibly goofy, insulting, and unrealistic. During the same period, Warrior was haunting Hollywood Hogan with all his magic tricks before Halloween Havoc. Must have been something in the water at the time.
What I really want to do is direct, and Scott's the lead in my next project, so if you mess with Scott, you're messing with me and my Academy Award.
Oh shit, do you think that Chucky missed out on his Oscar for being involved in this? Maybe Mickey Rourke's people were onto something. The best part of this was, like so many other bad things in wrestling before and since this, it added nothing to the build for their upcoming match at Halloween Havoc, and except for a total dismissal by Scott 1 week later in a promo, was never mentioned again. It's important to remember that Rick's challenge to Chucky had gone unanswered, but boy, sounds like a Mania weekend match if I ever heard one. Number 6. Ms. Zombies. Yes, this entry is less than a half-year old at the time of this video's release, but man, it was so god-awful, I think it deserves to be on the all-time list. Pro wrestling is no stranger to product placement over the decades, from Karate Fighters to Slim Jims to KFC and countless other examples. But for the most part, those commercial tie-ins don't challenge or interfere with the credibility of the actual wrestling or the stars on the show. Unlike, for example, this moment at 2021's WrestleMania Backlash, when a lumberjack match between Damian Priest and The Miz got slapped with an ad for Zack Snyder's Army of the Dead film before it. then things got weird. Suddenly, a match that was expected to feature many of the biggest stars in catering instead featured a dozen or so Performance Center guys as lurching, brain-eating zombies who just shuffled around the ring. I'll admit, the visual of the Thunderdome being transformed into a post-apocalyptic city was neat, but besides that, it was hard to focus on the actual wrestlers who'd been feuding ever since the Royal Rumble. The whole thing ended when the zombie jacks appeared to devour The Miz after Priest had won the match, only for Miz to show up the next day on Raw as if nothing had happened. I mean, for God's sakes, The Miz tore his ACL in that match, and WWE didn't have the good sense to show a zombie munching on The Miz's leg the next day? This stuff writes itself, people! And then after all that, the rest of the serious wrestlers had to get the show back on track, but how could anyone buy Bianca Belair and Bayley trading headlocks and suplexes when The Miz was eaten by the undead just moments before? As bonkers as wrestling can be, sometimes it can be a bridge too far, especially when you're reminded throughout that it's basically a commercial. But I guess I shouldn't be too mad that this is how they chose to promote the movie. I mean, when the actual star and actual former wrestler Batista is too busy to show up, you gotta go with what you have. Number 5, the Kiss Demon. In their nearly 50 years as a band, Kiss has put their name on practically everything, from a coffin/cooler to toilet paper co-branded with Hello Kitty and air guitar strings. You heard me, air guitar strings. So when you get right down to it, them sponsoring a wrestler just makes sense. In an effort to bolster WCW's sagging ratings with musical acts, Eric Bischoff inked a deal with Kiss that went farther reaching than anything previous. We're talking a live concert on Nitro, an even bigger concert on New Year's Eve, a line of WCW and Kiss-themed merchandise, and an entire stable of Kiss-inspired wrestlers. Did I mention that Eric Bischoff and Tony Schiavone were not only huge Kiss fans, but evidently also thought it was still 1977? Kiss performed at the end of the August 23rd, 1999 episode of Nitro, and as God of Thunder was wrapping up, a casket rose from the stage, and out emerged Bryan Adams as the Demon. Fans were so thrilled that Nitro's ratings dipped to the lowest number the show had done in 3 years. Talk about $500,000 well spent! Bischoff was out of the company weeks later, and that meant the larger elements of the Kiss partnership had dried up. But even though the angle was dead on arrival, a contract is still a contract, so the Demon himself was legally obligated to remain a part of the show. For example, he went up against the Wall 4 matches into Super Brawl, yet it was billed as a main event match because it was mandated in the contract that he get a main event match on pay-per-view. Well played, WCW. Bryan Adams was soon switched out for Dale Torborg, who ultimately just started going by the Demon Dale Torborg. Gotta admit, the name Dale Torborg sure takes a lot of the oomph out of the nickname The Demon. The Demon Dale Torborg's last major angle in WCW is when he feuded on and off with Vampiro, though something tells me that if Gene Simmons were actually watching this, he'd be upset that a wrestler in his image was hanging out with a misfit. The Demon disappeared almost a year to the day of the fateful Kiss concert on Nitro. Number 4, Master P and the No Limit Soldiers. Here's another one of those big musical acts WCW tried to get a rub off of. Hip-hop megastar Master P only made 2 appearances for WCW in the summer of '99, but his impact was huge and long-lasting. His arrival led to the debut of the No Limit Soldiers, which were meant to be a big babyface group, only let's just say the act wasn't a huge hit with the company's key demos.
Shit, they're hooty-hooing.
What?
They're fucking hooty-hooing.
Oh my God.
To combat this nefarious group, noted Southerner Kurt Hennig formed the West Texas Rednecks with Barry and Kendall Windham and Bobby Duncombe Jr. But it was hard to boo the poor guys when Master P's group outnumbered them, did the actual heelish things to them, and the rookies in the group wrestled so poorly. And besides, how can you hate on the guys that gave us the all-time classic, Rap is Crap?
There's only one thing that I hate, 'cause it's a bunch of crap. I hate rap.
Anyway, the stable lingered for only a few months, anchored by guys like Conan and Rey Mysterio, before it eventually dissolved soon after its formation. Master P's cousin Swole was brought in as a favor to the rap mogul, but he also fizzled out by September of that year. Hooty hoo and whatnot. Number 3, May 19th. If there's any character who's been able to endure the worst of what WWE Creative has to offer, it's Kane. If The Undertaker is WWE's big-budget blockbuster sci-fi horror fantasy epic, then Kane's career is sadly more akin to the straight-to-video ripoff version. Speaking of which, See No Evil. Released on May 19th, 2006, See No Evil was the first WWE film to not star The Rock, just a few months before The Marine with John Cena. And since Kane was the star of this gray and dingy slasher film, WWE gave it a big promotional boost with a storyline that was equal parts ludicrous and confusing. It all started when Kane began hearing the words May 19th echoing in his head over and over again. The idea was that only he could hear them, yet we, the viewers, also could hear them. Fans were reminded that May 19th was the release date for the upcoming film, but there was clearly something darker at play here. After weeks of chaos and violence caused by the mere mention of the date, Kane finally revealed that May 19th was the anniversary of the day his parents died in the funeral home fire started by The Undertaker. The release of your motion picture debut and the anniversary of one of your biggest traumas. Wow. Talk about bittersweet. On the Monday after the 19th, things went from weird to worse when a Kane imposter in a big poofy wig showed up to torment the big red monster, which magically turned the original Kane back into a babyface. As has been mentioned here before, Luke Gallows was apparently meant to be cast as the real Kane and send the established one to early retirement, but for some reason the angle was almost immediately given the kibosh. The night after their match at Vengeance, Glenn Jacobs reclaimed his spot as the one true Kane, sending the faker off in some sort of weird Principal Skinner Armin Tamzarian situation. Anyway, go see Kane pluck people's eyes out on the giant screen, everybody! Number 2, Robocop. Of all the ways you could tie in wrestling to things in pop culture, doing so with action movies and their stars seems like a no-brainer, but sadly for every Mr. T, there's a Robocop. In 1990, WCW jumped at the chance to have the brutally murdered cop-turned-cyborg law enforcement agent appear on their Capital Combat pay-per-view. Quite an achievement for a character whose original movie was so violent and gory, it was given an X rating before it was cut down for wide release.
So before you make your next move,
Think it over, Creed.
RC was brought in as the protector for an injured Sting, who was on a mission to keep all the little stingers safe from the Four Horsemen. Cop was the marketing linchpin for this pay-per-view. I mean, the show was even officially named Capital Combat: The Return of Robocop, so imagine the disappointment in fans' faces when they saw this all play out in real time. They kept cutting back to pre-taped segments of Gordon Soley, no doubt quietly cursing the state of his profession all the while, outside Sting and Robocop's locker room. Not sure why Robocop needs additional security since he's Robocop, but whatever. Midway through the show, the Stinger made his way out to address the fans and was immediately jumped by the Horsemen, who very politely locked him in a cage that had been conveniently left there from the previous match. Out lumbers Robocop, whose sole action for the evening included bending the very gimmicked bars of the shark cage to allow Sting to escape, while the Horsemen did the smart thing and tried to leave the whole mess. Robocop's underwhelming appearance was unfortunately by design, as WCW was under strict orders to not have the guy in the suit do anything remotely physical or else the suit would fall apart, which ended up happening anyway. In a business full of silly shit, Robocop opening the forbidden door between fictional action franchises and professional wrestling is some of the silliest of all. I mean, Zeus was dumb too, but that shit drew. With so many limitations, least of all the fan suspension of disbelief, it's a wonder that Robocop in WCW was greenlit in the first place. Now, you might have already figured out what the number 1 spot is in this countdown, but before we go to that, here are a few honorable mentions. John Cena versus Kevin Federline. Can you name the 5 people who pinned John Cena in 2007? Well, there was Shawn Michaels, the Great Khali, Batista, Carlito, yes, and Britney Spears' ex-husband. In a storyline that I forgot ran for a surprisingly long time until doing research for this video, D-list celeb Kevin Federline appeared on Raw in October of 2006 to promote his new album, then got into a verbal confrontation with the Golden Goose himself, John Cena. Federline cost Cena his match at Cyber Sunday later that month, and before long, a challenge was made for a match on the January 1st edition of Raw. The no DQ match took a few pages out of the Lawler-Kaufman playbook with a whole lot of stalling and shtick. In the end, K-Fed shocked the world when he pinned the Doctor of Thugonomics' shoulders to the mat for the 3 count after tons of interference on Cena. In fact, Federline's cornerman Johnny Nitro took more damage in this match than he did. Think of all the people over the years who really could have benefited from a signature win over John Cena. Guys like Wade Barrett, Bray Wyatt, Umaga. But no. John Cena bestowed one of his few golden tickets to the guy who gave the world Popazao. No one asked for that. Leslie Nielsen searches for The Undertaker. Hey, now I love Airplane and the Naked Gun movies as much as the next guy, okay? But I would argue that this didn't really belong. The Undertaker had spent most of 1994 in absentia after floating to the heavens at the Royal Rumble. Eventually, Ted DiBiase debuted an obvious fake, leading to the infamous Undertaker vs. Undertaker match at that year's SummerSlam. But Paul Bearer couldn't find the original Dead Man alone, he needed some help. From Hollywood. In comes Leslie Nielsen, former serious actor turned comedic film legend, in a series of vignettes where he searched for Taker to wacky results.
There I was, heading poolside, trying to catch some rain. Sorry, Ray. I don't know what it is, but I feel I'm onto something. I will solve this case at SummerSlam.
The segments were produced well, and yeah, they were silly, but is that what they were really trying to go for with this angle? Did they think that slapstick comedy is what the Taker versus Taker feud needed? It's another example of how WWE loves to take things that are naturally funny and then shove it down audiences' throats until the magic is gone. The Apes. As I've talked about here lately, for the rest of the year on this channel, I'm doing a big deep dive into the Invasion storyline 20 years later. And of all the moments between the WWF and the Alliance, this one here isn't the worst of all, but it is one of the weirdest. On an August episode of Raw, Chris Jericho did his usual shtick of calling Stephanie McMahon a slut, claiming she's run out of people on Earth to sleep with, so he set her up with some members of the Planet of the Apes. Which, I'm not sure if that qualifies as someone from a different planet, since the... Oh, you know what? I don't want to spoil anything. Yes, The Apes, from Planet of the Apes, that hot new film starring Mark Wahlberg. As Jericho recalls in his book Undisputed, Vince loves apes and jumped at doing this tie-in with the film, but had no idea how to make it work, so he just dumped it in Jericho's lap. What he and writer Brian Gewirtz ended up with was two guys in ape suits bringing gifts to the ring, ending with Jericho throwing pie in Stephanie's face. The moment got a big pop, but perhaps no one's reaction mattered more than Vince's, who, quote, gave Jericho a standing ovation as if he had just delivered a 5-star classic at WrestleMania. Gotta hand it to Vince. He knows what he likes. The guest host, I'm done talking about that. And my pick for the worst pop culture tie-in in all of wrestling is David Arquette winning the WCW World title. Now look, I have to preface this by saying that Arquette was always against the idea, and he donated his WCW earnings to the families of Brian Pillman and Owen Hart, and he recently went a long way in restoring the fans' respect for him by training and going on an actual run in the Indies, which was great. That being said, was there any doubt as to what else could have been in this #1 entry? In April of 2000, Warner Brothers released Ready to Rumble, a movie about two nerdy wrestling fans who fall backward into the main event scene in WCW. The movie starred Arquette, who made some appearances on TV to help promote it, but by the end of his run had somehow won the company's biggest championship.
David Arquette won the world title! David Arquette won the world title!
I can't believe I'm saying this, but there are actually a few ways they could have improved on this moment to hopefully bring people to the box office and maybe even increase ratings. Their first problem was the timing. Arquette's win took place weeks after the movie had been released, and in that business, 3 weeks might as well be 3 years. It happened way too late to bring people to the cinema. Their next problem was the setting. This took place on a taped episode of Thunder instead of a live Nitro, meaning WCW deprived itself of, at the very least, a nice little ratings boost to try and beat Raw that week. Third, the manner in which the title changed hands was bizarre. Arquette teamed with world champion Diamond Dallas Page against Jeff Jarrett and Eric Bischoff, with the rule being that anyone who got the pin became the champion, meaning he stole the title from his own partner. I bet DDP didn't look this happy again until he found out he was going to get pinned by Sarah. And fourth, and most importantly, they put their world championship on an actor. But my point here is, if you're going to do that no matter what, you can at least do it better. It was a stupid, desperate ploy for attention in one of WCW's final acts before it ultimately went out of business. Vince Russo can take credit for helping build one of wrestling's highest peaks, but can also take credit for giving birth to one of its lowest valleys when he booked this. And yep, you can blame Tony Schiavone for it too, since he admits having pitched the idea to him in the first place. WCW had many problems near the end that all had a hand in its demise, but putting the biggest prize in the promotion around the waist of an untrained actor in a failed promotional stunt was like a finger poke of doom off a cliff. And that's why Arquette's controversial championship run is my pick for the worst pop culture crossover in wrestling history. Got any that I missed? Let me know in the comments section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.
The door to the lumberjack locker room, and everyone in there is just like, because they're like dead or undead. They're undead.
What are you talking about?
Zombies, bro. I think the lumberjacks are zombies.
Is this another one of your weird new age motivational tactics? John, this isn't about you. This is about me embarrassing Damian Priest. So, snap out of it. Whatever you think you saw, was this in your head?